faster and more intense. That was his main direction. He just wanted us to speed through it.
George is notorious for saying, after a take, do it again, faster, more intensity. He certainly said to me, was, terrific tonic, and he'd do it again faster. But that's it, I didn't get more intensity. I didn't think 3PO with more intensity would be bearable, do you?
You're listening to Looking at Legends from Faster and More Intense. Hello everyone. So today, Shiloh and I are finally going to be talking about the story we teased, gotta be over a month ago, Easy Credits, which originally featured in the Star Wars Adventure Journal. I believe it was, in particular, issue 9, way back from February 1996. And I know what might be an impulsive reaction is to say, mid-1990s expanded universe? Scoff. And that's not entirely unfair. There was a lot of Drek released in the mid-90s. I think people at Lucasfilm have gone on to recognize it. And I think, it's this sort of initial unorganized nature of the expanded universe that, makes the idea of a very closely realized canon like we see now so appealing. But at the same time, I think it's important to recognize the importance of not just, the EU in the 1990s, but in particular of the Star Wars Adventure Journal and where it came from in Star Wars history. And so the Star Wars Adventure Journal was originally a publication that went along with Star Wars The Role-Playing Game, which was published by West End Games in the late 1980s. And you might not know, but after Return of the Jedi, there was a period where Star Wars was essentially dead. And a lot of people kind of point to Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire, the Thrawn trilogy, and Dark Empire over at Dark Horse, as revitalizing public interest in Star Wars. And that's fair, but at the same time, before them, you had the Star Wars role-playing game, which began in 1987, a few years before Heir to the Empire. And so at the very least, it deserves credit for maintaining an interest in Star Wars among the faithful. And indeed, when Timothy Zahn went on to publish Heir to the Empire, he actually received a bunch of information and source books from West End Games. And he was told to use the material in the background information presented there. And so kind of arising from the success of the role-playing series after Star Wars re-entered the public eye was the Star Wars Adventure Journal, which was initially conceived as a periodical to help players craft campaigns, introduce new characters, new builds they could play, new scenarios they could enjoy, while also featuring stuff like short fiction. But as the Adventure Journal went on, the fiction became not only more and more popular, but as some of the editors of the book realized, of a higher and higher quality. And so you start to get a bunch of novel writers, such as Michael Stackpole and Timothy Zahn, doing a bunch of work for the Star Wars Adventure Journal, really fleshing out, some of their works. But you also get writers who don't have much Star Wars experience and may not get much Star Wars experience afterwards, experimenting, using the wide world of the Star Wars galaxy to present very specific scenarios that might not recur again, for somewhat potential use in role-playing games, but also just to broaden the galaxy. And not all of these stories are of a great quality. For example, eventually they did a few compilations of some of the short stories included in these journals. I actually found last year a first edition copy of Tales from the Empire. Uh, the centerpiece there is a 4-part story by actually Michael Stackpole and Timothy Zahn collaborating. But there's also a bunch of other short stories, some of it about novel characters, some of it about characters you never see again. And it kind of runs the gamut, but there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. And so, even in the 90s, when you have, sort of a revitalization of Star Wars comics, of Star Wars novels, the Star Wars Adventure Journal, which ran for 15 installments, provides a pretty constant output of short Star Wars fiction that, importantly, isn't bound to follow the main characters of the story, like most of the novels were at the time. And so, while it's easy to dismiss it as being slight or unimportant, or even not very good, I think, in a way, the sort of material here is kind of important to the history of the EU, and beyond that, the history of Star Wars as a whole. So, without much further ado, let's get into discussing Easy Credits.
Wow, that was quite informative, Professor Costel. Will there be a quiz on Monday?
Yes, there will. A Monday, not next Monday. I haven't decided yet.
A Monday, all right. Well, that actually was very fascinating. I knew kind of a little bit about I think they were called the Dark Times, right?
Yeah. That's a pretty popular term.
Yeah, a term for it. But, I had always thought that the Zahn books were the first to break that. I didn't know that this stuff was actually coming out before then, so it's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not like you necessarily have this story, but rather the role-playing game that this story kind of evolves from. Is what's there. But yeah, there's a reason the Zahn books are so important. They were the first novel, real long-form fiction. Whereas with the role-playing game, players were kind of inspired to create their own. And the role-playing game provided a framework for them to do that. So it's really fascinating. And so, I guess I should mention, Easy Credits, the story of Shiloh and I read. If you want to, perhaps say legally read it, if you really want to own your own copy of the story, you'll just have to go on eBay and buy an old copy of the Adventure Journal, because to my knowledge, it's never been reprinted. That said, for the enterprising type,
you mean budding young criminals?
Well, I mean, that's one way of putting it. But yeah, for stories that weren't reprinted and stuff like Tales from the New Republic or Tales for the Empire, you can find complete copies of the Star Wars Adventure Journal online. You might have to download them. You might have to download a comic reader. But that's what Shiloh and I did. We didn't spend the money to go and get it. But, I mean, really, I almost had half a mind to go and buy my old copy just because it's a piece of EU history. And the cover to number 9 actually has, I think it's you're looking at it here, the Ralph McQuarrie Bounty Hunters piece. And that's pretty snazzy, I think. But what do I know? Along with that, there are a bunch of... So just... Yeah.
My Skype cut out there for a second. I didn't hear what you said. You started to say the cover has somebody on it.
The Ralph McQuarrie Bounty Hunters piece on Cloud City.
Okay.
So just so you have a sense of what one of these journals consisted of, the Star Wars Adventure Journal Volume 1, Number 9, included 4 short stories, including Easy Credits, and 7 articles, which I haven't actually read, because I just read the short story from Volume 9, but I assume would help you with the role-playing. And even then, if you do read Easy Credits, do it yourself a favor and find not just a transcription of the text, but an actual scan of the Adventure Journal. Because it actually has essentially role-playing information in there. So for example, the main character of the story is this thief, Cien Scon, And on like the second page, it has portrait. It has his type. It has his dexterity, his knowledge, mechanical, perception, strange, technical. And so I mean, it's just cool stuff where I've played D&D, never all that seriously, but it's the sort of thing where if you did, you kind of appreciate. You can read a story and then immediately bring the characters you meet into your own role-playing game. So I think there's a certain charm to that, honestly, that, we don't necessarily see nowadays. Obviously, Fantasy Flight publishes various role-playing games, but there's nothing like this going along with it, which is honestly kind of too bad, I think.
Yeah, I've never actually played a role-playing game. Well, I guess I've played Knights of the Old Republic, but as far as a tabletop, RPG, I've never played anything like that. One of these days I'll give it a shot, because it does sound kind of fun. But yeah, I could see how this, stuff would be really interesting to have, kind of... It's almost like a journal or something. It is a journal, just giving you ideas and stuff. So not necessarily... in a rule book or anything, but it's just, kind of source material you can pick from and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. And, we're talking about how interesting that is, here. But imagine if you got, say, a Timothy Zahn short story. And Shiloh, I know you know, very little about the expanded universe.
Very, very little. Whatever Wikipedia could bring to me, yes.
But, I mean, some of those stories, go about, say... You know Mara Jade, right? Luke's wife?
I know enough to know
of
who
her.
she is. But yeah, I know of her.
I mean, for example, you first meet her, and she's working for this guy, Talon Card, in Heir to the Empire. And one of these short stories gives the background on how Mara and Talon Card met, and how she came into his employment. And so to get, your quarterly installment of the Adventure Journal, and you now have that, but not only that, you get some, role-playing stuff to go along with it. I mean, that'd be pretty sweet. And obviously they published, big source books and guides that could help out with that. But even, not having experienced it, looking back, I can kind of see that, the Adventure Journal was kind of something special. Which isn't to say, again, that every story in it is good. Because I own... Tales from the Empire, and not every story in there is good, I say. That being said, I think when we randomly selected our topic for this talk from the Star Wars Essential Reader's Companion, I think we picked pretty good. So Shiloh, how did you like this story?
I quite liked Easy Credits, actually. It was pretty good for a short story. I mean, it had everything that a short story really requires. And especially a short story where the characters you're being introduced to you have never met before. I don't think there was a single person in here who was... Well, hold on. I believe Yoda is briefly referenced in an offhand way, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yes, we will.
But other than that, I mean, this, with a real short story like this, the author has a lot of challenges. They have to introduce new characters. They have to make you care about these characters. And they have to make a plot, that's worthy enough of a story, all in a very short amount of time. And, the author, I think Paul Danner is the one who wrote this, he did a very good job of this. I mean, he introduced these characters to us, he made us care about them, and he had quite a pretty good plot twist there at the end, which I really didn't see coming.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so overall, I mean, it's a pretty good piece of writing.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I should note that Cien Scon actually earned 3 stories in the Star Wars Adventure Journal. And this is the second one. So he did not have to introduce Cien Scon for good. But that being said, I think it's kind of fun, just to... Obviously, we hadn't read that for a short story, but there's still enough here where you can just kind of get dropped in and get a good sense of him.
Yeah.
And I think this is actually a place where those role-playing guides actually come into play as being very helpful to the short story. And that, they have a little capsule about the character, and it says, he's an intergalactic thief. He doesn't steal from anyone except Imperials, crime lords, and the obnoxiously rich. And so even though that's never made explicit in the story, because you have the little role-playing capsule to go along with it, you get a nice little bit of character background.
Yeah, and it does, like you said, it's never explicitly talked about in the story, but implicitly, once you know that information, you can kind of see how that influences his actions in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So definitely those little things help. But yeah, overall, it was a pretty interesting story, and it really made, if this is the kind of empire that you guys had in the EU, I kind of miss it, because this obviously takes place in a galaxy where the empire has basically kind of shattered and then reformed into kind of a remnant, and there's kind of a Cold War going on.
In a way.
In a way, but it just, they've stuck together more than, than how the New Republic kind of vanquished in the new canon, the Empire.
That's very true. In the EU, the Empire took forever to completely fall apart after Endor. This actually takes place pretty shortly after Endor, according to the Reader's Companion. Luke is still like an official part of the official Rebellion New Republic military. He hasn't resigned his commission yet.
Yeah.
Or maybe he just did. I forget. It's one of the two.
Yeah, I don't.
But it's
remember.
less than I think it's within a year after Endor. So they're still pretty well together.
Yeah, and one thing that was really
cool
on. Was kind of him talking about the main Imperial antagonist in the story, talking about how. By doing this thing, he has his own space that he's kind of in control of. He's kind of a local warlord, but still, within the informal, empire system, and how it's kind of just a military junta of the, ex-imperial generals and admirals who's kind of leading it. And it's really neat how it's kind of an informal system where, he's talking about how the weapon that, which part of the twist later on, but will gain him more prominence within the the ruling council or the other generals and admirals.
Yeah, just to give a little context, the way it fell in the EU was that you had certain imperial warlords strike out on their own. So you get say Warlord Zinj, who takes the title Warlord for the love of God. Kind of breaks off from the main, Imperial group. There's groups say the Pentastar Alignment is another one, where it's a group of Imperial forces, but they don't recognize the authority of the Central Empire. And then the Central Empire ebbs and flows in terms of its actual authority, depending on who's in charge. Saint Pestage, who I think has been canonized in Tarkin.
Yes, he has definitely been canonized.
He, in the EU was Palpatine's Grand Vizier, an important aide, and for a little while he's in charge. Hussein Izzard, head of Imperial Intelligence, takes charge for a while.
Who is also canonized now?
Her father is canonized. Armand
it is.
Izzard has been. And then, and eventually it comes to fall to Grand Admiral Thrawn, who's, essentially he's such an, obscenely competent, powerful figure, where all the Imperial fleets essentially just fall in line with him. And once he dies, all those forces splinter because they aren't able to rally behind one man.
Yeah, which is very realistic. That is how it works in the real world. It's happened many times, just like that, which is really, which makes sense. So, yeah, I really like that. I kind of miss having that. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not that you necessarily can read into all that from the story, but it's still fun. I think what we've wound up doing, and I don't know if this is a tragedy, is we're using this story as a lens to look back at the 90s EU.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the worst thing in the world, honestly.
No, we probably should get to the actual story, though, I would imagine.
We should. And so, I think there's a few things in the story that can be kind of used to both critique kind of almost the state of the EU and, some of the early not necessarily benefits, but some of the things that EU is doing right at this point. So, for example, Shiloh, you mentioned there's an oblique reference to Yoda.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what you think about this, but I kind of rolled my eyes when this came up.
Yeah, that was an eye roll passage right there. He basically said that the person who has taught him his thievery has quoted gave him a quote that he once told from a crazy that he once heard. Wow, I cannot talk today. Heard from a crazy old little green alien who claimed to be some mystical warrior or something.
Right.
Which raises some serious canon issues, like, why is some dude on Dagobah chatting it up with Yoda? Or why is Yoda floating around the galaxy chatting it up with... Yeah, so this was obviously before Revenge of the Sith came out, where we kind of learn that Yoda goes from Kashyyyk to Dagobah. Done. Now, not to say he doesn't leave, but still.
Yeah. And so this is one of the problems with the 90s EU, that they didn't have the full picture. And so West End Games was actually very, deliberately told by Lucasfilm not to talk about Vader and Palpatine's ascent to power, don't talk about the Clone Wars, stuff like that. And so in some cases it's just, an issue of the timeline. And that could be it here. Maybe this Cien Scon's uncle got this advice from Yoda way back in the day when he actually, the Jedi were still active. But even then, you can kind of see a problem that essentially they just didn't have many Jedi to work with if they wanted someone to have Jedi-ish advice. You had either Obi-Wan or you had Yoda, or you could make an oblique reference to some other Jedi. And at that point, it's kind of like, what's the point?
Yeah, which really isn't interesting, because, if you put yourself... like I said, I don't think you did, and I never did, grow up in an era where we were, completely devoid of any knowledge of the prequels or anything, anything from that era. So it's interesting to put yourself in the viewpoint of just seeing the original trilogy, and that's all you have. Throw out everything you've learned from the prequels and the Clone Wars and everything, and just try to imagine the Star Wars galaxy with nothing but the original trilogy and a couple of these source books to go on. It really is an interesting way of looking at the Star Wars galaxy.
Yeah. And so, the nature of Yoda is something that, and his exile, is something that, Timothy Zahn touches on a few times. And he actually, even Timothy Zahn has one of his characters in the Hand of Thrawn duology. I think it's the Hand of Thrawn duology. Is like his life is transformed by a chance meeting with Yoda after he crash lands on Dagobah, which reads as pretty convenient, and it does here too. You noted in our talk on Star Wars issue 18 or 19. Now even I forgot. Thanks for nothing, Shiloh. But we know that you're like, why does everyone have to have a history with one another? And I think that's fair. Even if you get rid of the timeline issues, even if the meeting actually happened and made sense in context, why does everyone have to know each other? Why is this random schmuck getting some Jedi-ish advice from Yoda? Doesn't Yoda have better things to do? Probably. So it's the sort of thing where, in an attempt to connect to the films, I think the story actually makes itself weaker. In contrast, though, one of the characters in it is Varese. I don't know how to pronounce her name. Varese, we'll say.
Yeah, she's the bodyguard, right?
Yeah, but not just any bodyguard. She is a Mistral Shadow Guard, which is a group of bodyguard types that was, unless it was created here, and I'd be very surprised. I think Timothy Zahn created it. Oh no, it appeared back. Yeah, Timothy Zahn did create it, just not where I thought he did. But Timothy Zahn created the Mistral Shadow Guards. And so by mentioning that this person is one, it connects to other expanded universe material at the time, obliquely, to be sure, but in a way that, kind of reinforces the fact that they take place in a single universe, that, it is all kind of connected in some way, shape, or form. And I think that, its use of connection here is much better done and much more effective than its connection to the movie.
Yeah. And I mean, and we can look at, if you, like I was saying, if you're just going off of the original trilogy, the galaxy feels really small. Just looking at those movies, the galaxy is portrayed as being incredibly small. You only ever see a little bit of, life outside of military stations and a forest moon and a snow planet, and it feels like a really small interconnected galaxy. And that's one thing that the prequels really did, is that they opened that galaxy up to a really large extent. And so it's interesting where I would imagine a lot of the EU that came out back before the prequels would really have focused on keeping that galaxy very small and interconnected.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of a credit to these authors of the Star Wars Adventure Journal, that even when the stories aren't good, they're at least trying to expand the galaxy and take it in new directions. Mm-hmm. And to that point, that's something you could argue that even Timothy Zahn, for all the work he's done for Star Wars, which is tremendous, one of his strengths, and you could argue in this sort of instance one of his weaknesses, is that he tries to tie all of his work closely together.
Yeah.
So you'll have characters showing up in a bunch of his work. Thrawn shows up in almost all of his novels in some way, shape, or form. Characters, recur, they come in, they come out. And that's not a bad thing. And I've argued in the past that if you want, an introduction to the expanded universe, Zahn is fantastic. Because if you just read his work, you'll get a great portrait of the galaxy. You'll get the benefits of those interconnecting characters, and it won't be overwhelming. But to your point, it almost keeps the galaxy small.
Yeah.
Where something like the Adventures of Cien Scon enlarge it.
Yeah, and I mean, Mr. Danner here, he does put a lot of, possibly first-time information into this short story. Like, for example, AT-ATs can run. They have kind of a run mode that's faster than their normal walk. Is this something that has ever been talked about before? I wouldn't imagine that it had. But I mean, just little things like that really do expand the galaxy.
Yeah, exactly. And then just think, he creates to my knowledge, this whole planet. He creates, a line of succession, of royalty. Mm-hmm. And so even if it's just small things, he's world building in a fantastic way. So I mean, it's just a lot of fun. Obviously, we haven't talked about the story that much, and I think that's kind of because it's a fairly slight story.
Yeah. Except for the major
twist.
Yeah.
Yes. Just to go through the plot real quick. Thief meets girl. Girl helps thief. They steal stuff. Girl turns out to be a traitor. Oh no, she's working with the Moff.
All right. I will do a better job here, all right? Okay. Imperial's making big bad new weapon. Hutt wants weapon. Hutt hires Cien Scon to get weapon. Cien Scon finds girl, who is princess, who wants to get off the world. Girl and Cien Scon get the weapon. Girl betrays Cien Scon. Cien Scon gets away with weapon. We find out at the end that the Moff wanted the weapon to get to the New Republic because it has a secret tracking device, and he wanted to go find where they're going to take it and destroy the New Republic's secret weapon labs.
Yeah, so presumably this gets wrapped up in the final CN Scon story. Not that we read it or will read it anytime soon, because we are strictly bound by the relatively random nature of Shiloh picking from the essential guide to or the essential reader's companion.
Yeah, and you know what? To tell you the truth, I don't want to know the rest of the story. I am actually totally okay with the story ending right here, and the Moff having some evil plan. Because, you know what? I like the character of the Moff. I like his plan. I know that in the story, as it turns out, he's probably going to be foiled. So, you know what? I like to think that everything went off great. The New Republic was destroyed, and the Empire reigned supreme for the next 1,000 years. So, I don't want to read the next story.
And, I'm going to take that a different direction than you. But... at the same time, this whole story has sort of a rollicking adventure, Saturday morning serial sort of feel. You have a dashing thief, you have a princess, you have your evil villain, you have a super weapon. And so you can almost imagine, at the end of that serial, it turns out the girl is evil, they do their evil laugh, and it's almost like a sort of tune in next week, and if you never tune in, you never find out.
Yeah,
it's almost kind of fun. There's a...
Yeah.
I don't want to say romantic notion, in the traditional...
Well, the girl and the Moff, drink a toast over her dead father's
Well,
body.
I mean, so... the romantic ideal,
Yeah, I know.
I don't want to romanticize the... Yeah.
Yeah.
But, yeah, exactly. It almost feels like an episode of a Saturday morning serial, and that cliffhanger only furthers it. And if you just never catch the next episode, well, that's not the biggest tragedy, because you know it's going to go on.
Yeah.
So, hey, you want my advice? Read the story. And if you really want to, go on Wikipedia, read up about CN Scon, and see what other adventure journals you'll have to download to find them.
Yeah.
Now, I think that's about all I have for easy credits. I don't know if you have anything, do you?
Nope, I'm good.
All right. Well, I have decided that having you randomly pick the number, now that we've already done it once, is not random enough.
Well,
so I'm going to get my book, and I'm going to set up a random number generator.
Oh, I used one of those the other day for the first time. Those are actually pretty cool.
I mean, they are. They just randomly generate a number.
Hey,
we only need
don't
one.
rain on my parade. They're pretty cool. All right.
I've been dealing with random number generators since AP Stat 6 years ago. Don't talk to me about random number generators. But I'll tell you what. If it's kind of like last time and we get multiple stories, multiple works on the same page, I'm assuming you won't know, and we'll just have you break the tie there.
All right.
So if you will excuse me, I will get the book, set up the generator, and it'll be a party.
All right. I'm going to sit here and talk to myself about, let's see, what kind of topic? Random number generators. So, this is a public service announcement. If you have never used a random number generator in your life, please do. You can just search in whatever search engine you like to use, random number generator. Go to that site. You can then enter in your field of numbers you would like to randomly generate a number from. Then select the Generate Number button, and you will get your certified random number.
All right. So, we need a random interval between 5 and 469.
Ooh.
And
I'm betting
our
it's going to
randomly...
be... Okay.
What's your guess?
469.
It gave us 104.
104, all right. Let's see.
This could be good. This is feeling Clone Wars era.
Ooh, hey, I can do this. That would be so funny if it was Shatterpoint.
Okay. You know what? We were like a page off from Shatterpoint, actually. Shatterpoint was introduced on 101. It has a whole page picture on 102. and then it wraps up on 103.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah,
and so I
me and George both read Shatterpoint. I don't know about 3 months ago. Or you had me read it and you reread it.
yeah, I had you read about 3 months ago. I read it
Yeah.
a while before that.
And we've been meaning
very
to
good
do
book.
review it at some point, but we're just gonna go ahead with this for now. So maybe someday we'll do Shatterpoint, but
All right, so we have two options here.
ooh,
They're actually both by the same author.
okay. Well, I have a penny right here, so
Well, here's my question.
okay.
Now, one of the articles starts on the previous page, and then like the entire article is on that page, and then the other one just has like the title and basic information introduced. So do we count the article that's not introduced, or do we count only the introduction, or do we count the complete article? I leave it to you. If you want to go with what occupies more space, that would be the first one. And I won't be honest, it'd probably be the easier one for us to analyze, though perhaps not the better.
This is too much. Do you think maybe we should just re-roll the random number generator?
No, because I actually
No?
think those will be interesting to talk about.
All right. Okay. So,
let me give you the two, and I'll let you decide.
well, hold on. Let's let the penny decide. Let's let Abraham Lincoln decide. All right. Heads will be the first one. Tails will be the second one. All right. Oops. Oh, and we have heads.
Okay, I'm actually excited.
All right.
So, Shiloh, we picked The Clone Wars, No Prisoners.
Ooh.
Written by Karen Travis. Came out in 2009 as a trade paperback.
Karen Travis, that name sounds familiar.
She is responsible for the Republic Commando series.
Ah, that's why
which
that sounds familiar.
famously remained unfinished after the Clone Wars kind of blew up all of her clone world building.
Okay. All right.
And so this came out short. This features Rex, Ahsoka, but it also features a bunch of old EU characters like Peleon, Thrawn's second in command, a few other characters first introduced in a fairly maligned mid-90s EU book.
Huh. So this was one of those books that came out during the Clone Wars series then, huh?
It is, yes.
Wow.
But it was early enough where Travis, didn't necessarily feel compelled to cut ties because the Mandalore shenanigans hadn't happened yet. But the other option, just so you know, would have been Republic Commando 000, the second book in the Republic Commando series. And I actually would be interested in having you read that just to see their treatment of clones and how it differs from the Clone Wars and how it's similar. Because I think you'd have found that very interesting. But that being said, No Prisoner should provide us if knowing Travis, it's showing me a very sympathetic look and interesting, delving into their psyche.
Yeah.
While not being as difficult, perhaps, for you to understand as 000 would have, going in blind.
Well, I mean, last time we almost decided to jettison easy credits in favor of the Shadows of Mindor or whatnot. So I think we should stick with the penny on this one. Abraham Lincoln has spoken, so we are going to go for, already forgot the title of that book, No Prisoners. Yes.
Yes. So we have that to look forward to. Hopefully it's not expensive as hell online.
Yeah.
Because this one we'll have to actually buy, because you could have picked another Star Wars Adventure Journal.
Yeah.
It'd be really bad if you got something from like an old issue of Star Wars Insider. That would be hard. That'd be a pain.
Yeah. Yeah, and we will probably review this. I'm thinking about 3 weeks out. Next week we may do something for Force Friday, or not 100% sure yet. I don't know if you guys over the Dish Arc table are going to be doing something for Force Friday, so not sure. And then the week after that, we will have Bloodlines to review. For me, at least, the most anticipated book of 2016. Yes, that is the year that we are in, 2016, in case anyone other than me forgot. And, yeah. So probably 3 weeks out is when we'll be doing the, No Prisoners.
Yep. And good for us. It's available on Amazon in paperback. Trade paperback. It's less than $15.
Okay.
So that's pretty good. We'll be fine.
All right.
So I guess we'll have to deal with that in a few weeks. But until then, I think that's everything. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, as always, if you would like to send us an email, you can do that at fasterandmoreintense@gmail.com. You can also find us on Twitter at FMI Podcasting. We're on Facebook at Facebook/FasterAndMoreIntense. We are on iTunes at Faster and More Intense Podcasting, and on YouTube at Faster and More Intense Podcasting. Star Wars is the exclusive trademark of Lucasfilm Limited. All Star Wars names and sounds are the exclusive copyright of Lucasfilm or parent company. All content generated on this site is the exclusive intellectual property of Faster and More Intense.